10:18 p.m., the emergency room of a massive Houston hospital is a war zone of sirens and stress. Suddenly the heavy double doors are slammed open with a violent crash. A massive man nearly 7 feet tall and built like a mountain storms inside. His face is a mask of pure rage, and sweaty screams for a doctor, his voice shaking the glass partitions. Other patients shrink back in terror. Security guards reach for their radios, their bodies tensing for a fight, but as everyone else retreats, rookie nurse Sarah Miller, only 24 years old, steps forward. She asked quietly, "Sir, tell me what's wrong." Sarah Miller had been a registered nurse for exactly 3 weeks in the intricate, often brutal hierarchy of the Houston Memorial Emergency Department. 3 weeks meant you were essentially a ghost in scrubs. You were the one assigned to the lowest priority tasks, fetching extra pillows, emptying suction canisters, or cleaning up the spills that the more senior staff didn't have the time or the inclination to touch. You were the one who stood in the back of the trauma bay during a high-stakes code, watching the Real professionals work with a mixture of awe and terrifying imposter syndrome. Sarah was small, barely 5'3", and possessed a youthful porcelain face that made patients and colleagues alike constantly ask if she was a high school volunteer. To the veteran charge nurses who had seen it all, and the jaded attending physicians who lived on a diet of black coffee and adrenaline, Sarah was just a rookie. She still had the smell of crisp textbooks and fresh laundry on her. She hadn't yet been hardened by the endless stream of human tragedy that flowed through the Houston streets. She had grown up in a small town in East Texas, a place where everyone knew your name, and the hospital was a quiet building where people went to heal peacefully. Moving to Houston had been a shock to her system. The city was a sprawling, vibrating monster, and the air was its beating, bruised heart. The night shift was particularly brutal. Houston was trapped in the grip of a relentless August heat wave. The humidity was so thick it felt like breathing through a warm, wet blanket. Outside, the air smelled of exhaust fumes and asphalt. Inside, the air was overflowing with the city's chaos. It was a Saturday night, the witching hour for emergency medicine. There was a 6-car pileup on the I-10. A high school football star with a compound fracture and 3 cases of acute abdominal pain that had all arrived in the same 10-minute window. The air was a heavy cocktail of industrial-grade lavender cleaner old coffee, and the metallic unmistakable tang of fresh blood. Every single bed was taken, and the hallways were lined with gurneys holding patients who were either groaning in pain or staring at the ceiling in a drug-induced fog. Sarah had been running for 6 hours straight, her cheap nursing clog squeaking against the linoleum, her mind a whirlwind of vital signs, lab requests, and discharge papers. Then the world stopped. The bang was so violent it sounded like a structural failure. When the heavy double-reinforced steel doors flew open, the entire room seemed to physically contract. The man who entered didn't just walk in, he invaded the space. He was a literal giant, nearly 7 feet of raw muscle and bone. He was wearing a grease-stained work shirt that looked 2 sizes too small for his shoulders, heavy steel-toed boots that left dusty prints on the floor, and his face was a terrifying mask of sweat and crimson rage. "I need a doctor," he roared, the sound vibrating through the acoustic ceiling tiles. "Now someone look at me right now." The lobby went dead silent. A toddler who had been crying stopped mid-sob. The head of hospital security, a retired Houston police officer named Mike, immediately stepped into the man's path. Mike was a big guy himself, but next to this giant he looked like a child. Mike's hand hovered near his belt, his body tensing for a physical altercation. "So you need to back up and calm down," Mike said, his voice hard and practiced. "We cannot have you screaming in the triage area. If you don't lower your voice, I'm going to have to escort you out of the building. Do you understand?" The giant turned on Mike, his fist clenching so tight the veins in his forearms looked like they were about to burst through the skin. "Don't you tell me to calm down," he shouted back, leaning into Mike's personal space. "I said I need help. I'm not leaving until a doctor looks at me." The tension was a physical weight in the room. The triage nurses were reaching for their emergency silent alarms. The doctors in the back were looking for a reason not to come out. Most of the staff were looking for a place to duck or waiting for the inevitable moment when Mike would have to use his taser. But Sarah Miller, standing just 5 feet away near the charging station, didn't see a threat. She didn't see a disturbing the peace charge. She had been trained by an old grizzled clinical instructor back in school who told her fear wears many masks. "Sarah, usually it looks like anger. Your job is to look behind the mask," while the others saw a security problem. Sarah saw a patient in crisis. She noticed the way the man was leaning suddenly to his right. She saw the fine, oily sheen of cold sweat on his forehead, a sweat that was different from the heat-induced perspiration of the night outside. She saw his left hand, which was white-knuckled and trembling, clutching the thick fabric of his work shirt right over his sternum. His eyes weren't just angry, they were dilated and darting, searching for an exit from his own body. She stepped forward, placing herself between the security guard and the giant bear of a man. It was a visual that would be talked about in the break room for years. A tiny 24-year-old rookie standing in the shadow of a mountain of a man. "Sir," she said, her voice low, steady, and remarkably devoid of fear. "My name is Sarah. I'm one of the nurses here. I can see you're in a lot of pain. Tell me, did the pain start?" Suddenly the giant froze. The roar died in his throat. The rage in his eyes flickered, replaced for a split second by a look of absolute raw primal terror. He looked down at the small woman in the light blue scrubs. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple moving convulsively. His breathing was coming in jagged, shallow, whistling gasps. "I was driving," he rasped, his voice dropping from a roar to a broken whisper. It hit me like a sledgehammer. My chest, it feels like there's a 10-ton anchor sitting right on my ribs. I can't get the air in." Sarah didn't hesitate. She didn't look at Mike. For permission, she didn't wait for a doctor's signature or for the registration desk to get a social security number. She grabbed a nearby heavy-duty wheelchair and locked the brake. "Sit down, Robert," she said, taking a guess at the man's name from a small patch on his shirt. "Sit down right now. I'm taking you to bed, for we are going to find out exactly what's happening, and we are going to do it right now." The senior nurses watched in stunned silence as the rookie led the monster into the high acuity zone of the ER. They whispered about a lack of protocol and safety violations. They expected the man to erupt again, but Sarah wasn't listening to the whispers of the room. She was listening to the rhythmic, agonizing struggle of the man's heart. "If you think people are sometimes judged too quickly," type that's unfair. Inside the small curtained sanctuary of bed for the giant man looked remarkably small. For the first time his name was indeed Robert, a construction foreman who had spent the last 20 years lifting steel beams and managing the toughest crews in the city. He was a man built of iron and grit, but now he was trembling like a leaf in a storm. The hospital gown he was asked to put on didn't even cover half of his chest. Sarah moved with a mechanical, quiet efficiency that completely belied her 3 weeks of experience in that small space. The world outside, the sirens, the shouting, the heat ceased to exist. There was only the monitor, the patient, and the nurse. She strapped the oversized blood pressure cuff on his massive bicep. She clipped the pulse oximeter onto his calloused finger, and she began to meticulously hook up the 12 cardiac monitor leads across his chest. "Robert, I need you to try and take slow, deep breaths for me," she said, her hand steady as she applied the adhesive patches. "I know it's hard. I know it feels like you're fighting for air. Just focus on my voice. We've got you." The monitor chirped to life, and the first wave of data hit the screen. The numbers were a clinical nightmare. Blood pressure 182/114, heart rate 124. And irregular skipping beats in a dangerous chaotic rhythm. Oxygen saturation 91%. Robert was in the middle of a systemic catastrophic collapse. "My arm," Robert groaned, his eyes rolling back slightly as his head hit the thin hospital pillow. "It feels like it's falling asleep. The left one, it's tingling all the way down to my fingertips and my jaw. It feels like it's been crushed in a vice." Sarah's heart skipped its own beat, radiating pain to the left arm and jaw, crushing substernal pressure diaphoresis in a sudden violent onset. Every page of every textbook she had ever memorized was screaming at her. This wasn't a panic attack. This wasn't a man who was angry or aggressive because he wanted to be. This was a man whose heart was literally suffocating. He was experiencing a massive cardiac event. Dr. Sterling, the senior attending physician, pushed through the curtain. Sterling was a man who prided himself on efficiency. He was already annoyed by the chaos in the lobby and was looking for someone to blame. "Sarah, why is this man in a trauma bed? Registration says he hasn't been triaged. We have 3 ambulance arrivals from the interstate pile up waiting in the bay. We don't have room for people who walking off the street shouting." Sarah didn't look up from the monitor. She didn't flinch at the doctor's tone. She simply pointed at the red numbers on the screen. "Dr. Sterling, this is Robert. He has crushing substernal chest pain that started suddenly while he was driving. It's radiating to his left arm and jaw. His tachycardic hypertensive and his oxygen is dropping. I've already started him on 4 liters of high-flow oxygen, and I am running a 12-lead ECG right now." Sterling paused. He looked at the giant on the bed, then at the monitor, then back at Sarah. He had intended to order Mike to take the man to the waiting room for a psych evaluation, but something about the way the rookie nurse was standing, her shoulders back, her eyes locked on the telemetry, no hesitation in her hands, made him stop. He saw the notch on the ECG tracing that only a trained eye would catch. "Do it," Sterling commanded, his voice losing its edge of annoyance and replacing it with clinical urgency. "Run the full 12 lead. I want a stat troponin level, a CMP, and a portable chest X-ray. Get the pharmacy to send up an aspirin and a nitro drip now." As the ECG machine began to produce the long white rhythmic strip of paper, the other staff members began to drift toward the curtains of bed, for they had all heard about the giant who had stormed the ER. They had expected to see a fighter struggle, a security incident. Instead they saw a quiet, focused medical operation. They saw Sarah Miller, the girl they had thought was a ghost, acting as the absolute anchor of the room. She was the one who found a vein for the large bore 4 on her first try. Even as Robert's blood pressure made his veins difficult to access, she was the one who explained every single step to Robert, keeping him grounded in reality while his body was trying to pull him into the dark. "You're doing great, Robert," she whispered, leaning close so he could hear her over the rising noise of the sirens outside. "The doctor is here. The machines are working. We are catching this early. You were smart to come in when you did." The rookie was no longer just the one fetching ice or changing linens. She was the reason this man was still breathing. She had saved the golden minutes, the precious time that stands between survival and permanent heart damage. She had done it by refusing to wait for the man's anger to subside and by realizing that his rage was just the sound of a man screaming for his life. The veteran nurses began to look at each other with a collective sense of humility. They realized that they had almost let a man die in the parking lot because they were too busy looking at the size of his fist instead of the state of his heart. "If you realize the rookie nurse might have saved precious time." Type, "I was wrong." The ECG strip finished printing with a low rhythmic mechanical buzz. Dr. Sterling snatched it from the machine. Before it even touched the floor, his eyes scanned the peaks and valleys of the ink with the intensity of a man reading a death warrant. His face went palest. "Elevation in the lateral lead," Sterling muttered, his voice stripped of all its earlier arrogance. "It's a lateral STEMI. We have a total blockage in the main artery." He's a ticking time bomb. "Notify the cath lab immediately. Tell them we are moving a 250-pound male in 5 minutes. No delays." The Atmosphere in bed shifted from emergency assessment to all-out war. A swarm of technicians, respiratory therapists and surgical prep nurses descended on the area. Robert was being prepped for emergency surgery to clear the blockage in his heart. The room was a whirlwind of activity, the sound of scissors cutting through his work shirt, the beep of the infusion pumps, the sharp commands of the doctors. But through all the noise, Robert's eyes never left Sarah. In the middle of the storm, she was his only constant. Sarah, he rasped, reaching out a massive shaking hand. His hand was so large it completely enveloped hers, a contrast of strength and fragility. Sarah, am I going to die? Be honest with me. Sarah squeezed his hand back, her grip firm and human. She didn't give him a fake smile, she gave him the truth. Not today, Robert, not on my watch. We found the problem. The best surgeons in Houston are waiting for you upstairs. They're going to fix it. I'll be right here until they wheel you into that elevator. As they waited for the transport team to arrive, the high-flow oxygen started to settle Robert's breathing, just enough for him to speak. He spoke in a low, broken, gravelly voice that made the room go silent. I lost my younger brother in January. He whispered, a single tear tracing a path through the dust and sweat on his cheek. Same thing happened. He was at a grocery store and his chest started to burn. He started shouting. He started getting loud because he couldn't get a full breath and he was scared. The manager called the police because they thought he was a drunk or high and causing a scene. They didn't see a sick man, they saw a problem. The silence that hit the room was absolute. Even the senior doctors stopped their charting. The police arrived. Robert continued, his voice trembling. They tackled him. They put him in the back of a squad car. He died 10 minutes later, face down in the backseat from a heart attack. No one listened to him. Not one person looked at him and saw that he was dying. Sarah felt a heavy lump in her throat. She could feel the injustice of the brother's story hanging in the air like a cold fog. She realized that Robert hadn't stormed the because he was a violent man. He had stormed the because he was a grieving man who was fighting for his life in the only way he knew how, by being too loud to be ignored. He was terrified that if he wasn't aggressive, if he wasn't a mountain, he would be treated like a problem and end up like his brother. I saw you, Robert, Sarah said softly, her eyes wet, but her voice steady. The second you walked through those doors, I saw you and I heard you when the transport team finally arrived to wheel the heavy gurney toward the